For centuries, Rome feared nothing. The empire that conquered the world, a titan of bronze and marble, finally met the one enemy it couldn't defeat. They came first as refugees, seeking shelter from the encroaching Huns. They returned as executioners. This wasn't just an invasion, it was revenge. Welcome back to History Unearthed, where we dig up the stories that shaped our world. Today we're venturing back to the tumultuous final centuries of the Western Roman Empire. We often hear about the fall of Rome as a single event, a sudden collapse. But the truth is far more complex, a slow burn of arrogance, betrayal, and a thirst for vengeance that had been simmering for generations. This is the story of how the so-called Barbarians, the Goths, Vandals, and others, brought the mightiest empire in history to its knees. And it all began not with an act of war, but with an act of desperation. In the late 4th century, the Huns, a nomadic force of unparalleled ferocity, swept out of the east, displacing entire peoples. The Goths, a collection of Germanic tribes living along the Danube River, were directly in their path. Terrified, they looked south to the only power that could seemingly offer salvation, Rome. They sent envoys to the Eastern Roman Emperor Valens, pleading for asylum within the empire's borders. They offered to serve as soldiers, to farm the land, to become loyal subjects in exchange for safety. To Emperor Valens, this seemed like a golden opportunity. He saw a source of cheap manpower for his armies and new taxpayers for his treasury. He granted their request. In 376 AD, tens of thousands of Goths, men, women, and children, crossed the Danube, believing they had found a new home. But what Rome didn't see was already inside its walls. The welcome they received was not one of refuge, but of exploitation. Roman officials, seeing a captive and desperate population, were corrupt and cruel. They stole the Goths' supplies, sold their children into slavery for dog meat, and treated them with utter contempt. Starving and humiliated, the Goths' hope curdled into rage. They had come as allies, but Rome had made them enemies. The breaking point was inevitable. The Goths weren't savages. They were survivors, pushed to the brink by Roman greed. Their plea for help had been ignored. Now their roar of defiance would be heard across the empire. This simmering resentment exploded into open rebellion. The Goths, once supplicants, now took up arms. They began raiding the Balkan countryside, the very lands they were meant to protect. Emperor Valens, infuriated and overconfident, decided to crush the uprising himself. He marched his elite field army to Thrace, determined to teach the Goths a lesson they would never forget. He was right. The lesson learned that day would not be by the Goths, but by Rome itself. The next battle would erase centuries of military dominance. On August 9th, 378 AD, near the city of Adrianople, the Roman legions met the Gothic army. Valens, eager for personal glory and underestimating his foe, ordered a hasty attack without waiting for reinforcements. It was a catastrophic miscalculation. The Gothic cavalry, superior and well-timed, smashed into the Roman flanks, enveloping and annihilating the legions. The battle was a massacre. Emperor Valens himself was killed, his body never recovered. 2/3 of the Eastern Roman army lay dead on the field. Adrianople wasn't just a defeat, it was the beginning of the end. For the first time in centuries, a Roman emperor had been killed in battle by a foreign enemy on Roman soil. The myth of Roman invincibility was shattered forever. The empire rotted from within long before the barbarians arrived, and Adrianople exposed the decay for all to see. The shock of Adrianople reverberated throughout the empire. Rome was forced to negotiate, granting the Goths land and a form of autonomy within its borders. But this was a fragile peace, a plaster over a festering wound. The Goths were now a permanent, semi-independent military force inside the empire, a constant reminder of Rome's vulnerability. A new generation grew up knowing that Rome could bleed, and among them was a young man who had witnessed the betrayal and the triumph. Alaric. Alaric the Goth was a product of this new world. He served in the Roman army, learning its tactics and witnessing its internal politics and weaknesses firsthand. He saw how barbarians were used as cannon fodder, their lives spent to protect Roman interests while they were still treated as second-class citizens. He felt the sting of broken promises and disrespect. Alaric didn't just want to destroy Rome. He wanted Rome to remember. He wanted a permanent home for his people, titles, and the respect he felt they had earned. But Rome's arrogance blinded it to the storm rising at its gates. After years of being ignored and manipulated by the Western Roman court, Alaric's patience ran out. In 410 AD, he did the unthinkable. He marched his Gothic army down the Italian peninsula and stood before the walls of Rome itself. The Eternal City, the heart of the empire, which had not been sacked by a foreign enemy in 800 years. Even then, Alaric tried to negotiate. He didn't want to burn the city. He wanted a deal. But the emperor, safely hidden in Ravenna, refused. So, Alaric laid siege. Inside the city, panic set in. Starvation and disease were rampant. Finally, on August 24th, 410 AD, a gate was opened from within, perhaps by a slave sympathetic to the Goths, and Alaric's army poured into the streets of Rome. For 3 days, the city was sacked. Palaces were looted, treasures were seized, and the psychological blow was immeasurable. When the Eternal City burned, the world realized even gods can fall. The sack was relatively restrained by the standards of the age. Alaric ordered Christian churches to be spared, but the damage was done. This was more than war. It was a reckoning. The message was clear. No one was safe. The empire's heart was vulnerable. Rome didn't fall on that day in 410. It would limp on for another 66 years. But the sack of Rome was a mortal wound from which the Western Empire would never truly recover. It exposed the central government's impotence and accelerated the fragmentation of its provinces. Other groups, like the Vandals, saw the weakness. They crossed into Gaul, then Spain, and finally into North Africa, Rome's breadbasket. In 455, the Vandals did what Alaric had done, sacking Rome a second time, this one far more brutal and destructive. The empire was being picked apart, piece by piece, not by a single unified enemy, but by peoples it had wronged, exploited, or underestimated for decades. The final Barbarian act was less a dramatic battle and more a quiet conclusion to a long, slow death. By 476 AD, the Western Roman Emperor was a powerless boy named Romulus Augustulus. The real power was held by barbarian generals in the Roman army. One of these generals, a Germanic chieftain named Odoacer, had decided the charade was over. He deposed Romulus Augustulus, but didn't bother to name a successor, and simply declared himself king of Italy. He sent the imperial insignia, the symbols of Western Roman power, to the Eastern Emperor in Constantinople. The message was simple: it's over. The day Rome knew fear, starting at Adrianople, was the day the ancient world ended. So, did the barbarians destroy Rome? The answer is yes and no. They were the agents of its final destruction, the ones who delivered the killing blows. But the disease was internal. The barbarians won the war, but Rome destroyed itself. Centuries of overexpansion, political instability, economic decay, and a fatal arrogance had hollowed out the empire from within. The Goths, Vandals, and others were not just invaders. They were a symptom of Rome's own terminal illness. They came seeking refuge and were met with cruelty. They offered their strength and were met with betrayal. In the end, they were not the destroyers of a great civilization, but its inheritors. The revenge of the barbarians was simply the final chapter in a story that Rome had written for itself. Rome didn't fall in a day. It fell from pride. What do you think? Was the fall of Rome inevitable, or could it have been saved? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. History is a conversation, and we want to hear your voice. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the past. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe to History Unearthed and hit that notification bell so you never miss an episode. We'll see you next time.